Love.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Brandy. I'm so excited to be doing this with you.
I know, me too. I was really excited when we were going to do this in person in New York City, but this is obviously the next best thing. So I wanted to start out by saying it is Pride Month, so happy Pride. How are you spending the month?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating Pride Month, obviously. It was always going to be a little odd with the pandemic, but I think what's happening right now with the Black Lives Matters protests is actually it really resonates with Pride. I think that what's going on with these protests is the same as what Pride is about. It's about protesting police brutality, and I don't think you can really participate with Pride without participating in those protests. I think that they are hand in hand, and that's also part of the reason I'm so excited to be doing this event with you, because I love that we're going to be able to talk about the ways that racism and homophobia have similarities and differences, and microaggressions and macroaggressions. And I think that that's going to be a really awesome conversation, I hope. But why don't we start with reading? Do you want to read first?
Yeah, I will read. I'm not going to start at the beginning because I like to complicate things. But I'm going to read just a few pages from my most recent novel, The Only Black Girls in Town. It's my first middle grade novel. Thank you. It's about, just a little background, it's about a 12-year-old girl named Alberta who, according to the title, as you can tell, is basically the only Black girl her age in her small town. She lives on the central coast of California in a beach town, a really white area. And at the beginning of the novel, she finds out that the bed and breakfast across the street from where she lives with her and her two dads has been sold to a new family. And it's a single mom and her daughter from Brooklyn, and they are Black. And so she's really excited to go meet them. So this scene is ahead of when she's going to go meet them. I only have a few more days to sleep in until school starts, but I get up early the next morning to have breakfast with my dads. Today is the day we're meeting the new neighbors. Dad doesn't go into the gallery until later, usually not until it's been open at least a couple of hours. He has people to take care of things, so sometimes he doesn't show up until after lunch. But he always gets up early to have breakfast with Elliot before Elliot drives to San Luis Obispo for work. It's about 20 minutes up the Central Coast from our home in Ewing Beach. Well, you're up early, Dad says, running a hand over the top of my dreadlocks. I've already poured a bowl of cereal and almond milk. Elliot is making coffee in the French press, wearing his professor clothes, a dark button-down shirt, dress shoes, and khaki pants. I couldn't believe it when I first saw pictures of him and Dad from the art commune. There's one of Elliot standing in a field, wearing a pair of bright red overalls with a black plastic rose in the front pocket. Don't you think we should go meet the neighbors this morning? They might be busy in the afternoon. I shovel a spoonful of Cheerios into my mouth. Dad peers at the banana bread. We wrapped it up in plastic last night after it cooled. This sure would be good with a cup of coffee, he says. Dad. I kid, Alberta, but we'll wrap it up nice for them before we take it over. Make it look like more of a gift. I don't know how he's planning to do that, but Dad is good at making things look fancy and nice, so I just nod. Elliot sits down with a plate of avocado toast. You two seem awfully invested in these new neighbors. Do you know something about them that I don't? Are they superheroes? A family of mind readers? They're Black, I say. And I think that should be enough of an explanation, but Elliot still looks confused. Just because they're Black doesn't mean they're going to be our new best friends, he says slowly. We don't know anything about them. But I don't want to have another weird conversation about being Black. Not that it would be the same as when I was talking to my best friend Laramie, but sometimes Elliot and Dad disagree when they talk about race. I always feel like I have to choose sides, even though I thought we were all on the same team. Go on, Al, Elliot encourages. Well, when we go to parties and bonfires, you and Dad always go up to the Black people first. Sometimes you spend almost the whole night talking to them. Or if you see Black people you don't even know when we're downtown, you nod at them, like you're already friends. Isn't this sort of like that? Elliot drinks his coffee. I see what you mean. But I don't want you putting expectations on people. We might have more in common with, say, the McKees than the new neighbors. I make a face into my cereal. Bad example. We have absolutely nothing in common with the McKees, and Elliot knows it. Dad comes up behind him and slides a hand onto his shoulder. I think what your dear father is trying to say is that all our skinfolk ain't kinfolk. What? Elliot's hand reaches up to meet Dad's and squeezes. Yes, exactly. Just because we're Black and the new neighbors are Black doesn't mean we have the same values or interests. But, Dad adds, it's always a good idea to reach out to your skinfolk, especially when they're new in the community, and especially when there are barely any of us here in the first place. Elliot frowns a little. Well, there are more of us now than there ever have been. It could always be worse. All of us combined are less than 0.5% of the population, Dad says, looking at him. We can still count the number of families on two hands. Yes, it could be worse, but not much. Dad and Elliot don't look angry when they argue. They never raise their voices, at least not around me, but they don't hide when they're disagreeing. Nothing wrong with a little healthy discourse, Elliot always says, and Dad always says that just means he likes to argue. But he usually smiles or hugs or kisses him by his ear when he says that, and Elliot always smiles and hugs and kisses him back. Okay. Elliot holds up his hands like he's been defeated. I expect a full report on our new best friends at dinner tonight. I know Elliot doesn't want me to get too excited, but I hope the new neighbors are kinfolk.
Yay!
Thank you.
It's such a great book. It's such an excellent book.
Thank you so much.
All right, I should read now, and then we can actually start talking.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read from the first couple pages, and then I will describe the book briefly, and then we can chat. So I am opening with the opening. The smell wraps around me like a reunion between old friends when I step off the bus. That dark soil smell, but mixed with something lighter, something green that immediately makes me think of leaves and rain or trees in the wind. I love this smell. I love it every summer. It's the smell of freedom. Not that stupid kayaking in a shirtless in a Viagra commercial freedom. That's for straight people. This is different. It's the who cares if your wrists are loose freedom. The freedom from having two seniors at the table over joke about something being so gay at lunch. Several tables are set out next to the parking lot, a big banner hanging over them. Welcome to Camp Outland. This year, I admit, it smells a little different. Maybe not quite as free, but I knew it would be like this when I came up with my plan. This smell, I hope. Slightly less pine, a bit more grass, the barest whiff of daisy, which I could be imagining. This is the smell of love. Keep it moving, Joan, the camp director, calls out to us as we step off the bus we've been traveling on for the last several hours, waving our hands like a traffic cop. Tables are by age. Find your age. Go to that table to register. I look for the table that says 16 and wait in line. I run my hands over my newly shortened hair. Until 2 days ago, it had been chin length and wavy and super cute, if I do say so myself, but I needed to lose it for the plan to work. The line of campers moves forward, and I'm at the front, staring down at Mark, the theater counselor, my counselor. I think he's in his 40s, gray at the temples, skin that's a little too tan for a white guy, wearing the Camp Outland polo, big aviator sunglasses, and a pin that says Theater Gay in sparkly rainbow letters. This will be the big test. He looks up at me, and for a moment there's a flash, like he recognizes me, but then he squints, confused. What's your name, honey? He asks. I smile, not my usual big grin. I've been working on changing it. Now it's more like a smirk. Randall, I say. Randall Kappelhoff. Randy? He practically shouts it, looking me over again as he stands up. Oh my God, what happened to you? Puberty, I say, now smiling my real smile. I look around and bring it back to a smirk. Honey, you were a baritone last summer. This isn't puberty, he says. I barely recognized you. Good, I think. That's the point. I just thought it was time for a change, I say. Were you being bullied? He asks, concerned eyes peeking over his sunglasses. No, I shake my head. Just wanted to try something new. Well, Mark says, sitting down, this is certainly new. I hope you haven't changed so much you're not auditioning for the show this summer, though. We'll see, I say. He frowns and flips through the pages on his clipboard. Well, at least you'll be hanging out with us. You're in cabin 7. He takes a name tag label out from the back of his clipboard and writes a big R on it before I think to stop him. Actually, I say, putting out a hand, it's Dell now. He peeks up at me over the sunglasses again. Dell? Yeah, I nod, chin first. I'm Dell. Okay, he says like he doesn't believe me, and writes it out on a new name tag sticker and hands it to me. I press it over my chest, rubbing it in, hoping it will stick. Well, I'm going to have to talk to my therapist about this later, he says to himself. Then he glances at his watch and turns back to me. Flagpole meetup is at 11, so go pick a bunk and be there in 20 minutes. Thanks, I say. Later, Dell, he says. I walk back over to the bus where our bags have been unloaded and pick up the big military surplus bag I bought online. The purple wheelie bag with the stickers of cats wearing tiaras on it wasn't going to work this summer. Neither was having my parents drop me off. I think that made them a little sad. Camp Outland had been their idea 4 years ago after I came out. Not many other 12-year-olds were talking about how dreamy and cute Skylar Astin was in Pitch Perfect 2 and how I hoped my boyfriend would look like him someday, so they thought it would be good for me to meet other queer kids, and they found Camp Outland, a 4-week sleepaway summer camp for LGBTQIA plus teens nestled in the woods of northern Connecticut. And let's be honest, it was an amazing idea. Every summer has been better than the last, but this summer is going to be the best, because this summer Hudson Aronson Lim is going to fall in love with me.
I love your book, and I just kind of realized your book is a rom-com.
Oh, yeah.
What a rom-com? Okay, because I was low-key laughing like the whole time I read it. I mean, it has some really
low-key
sweet moments, but it's lots of laugh out loud moments too. But I loved it so much.
Thank you. So yeah, from those pages, what happens is Randy has decided he has a plan. He's butched himself up for this Hudson guy who he's been in love with for 4 summers, who defines himself as mask for mask, which means he believes himself to be a masculine gay guy and is only interested in other masculine gay guys. And Randy's plan is to make himself into this masculine dream boy to win Hudson's heart. This is, of course, a terrible plan, and things go wrong.
Yeah, I love that we know it's like a terrible plan from like the first 5 pages, and you're just like, okay, I can't wait to see how this works out.
Literally everyone tells him it's a terrible plan.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe the inspiration behind that? Because I was telling you offline that I have never been to camp, except for like dance camp in high school with my pom team. So I really loved reading about this, but I've read a lot of books about camp, but I've never read about a gay camp, an LGBTQ plus camp. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the original inspiration was actually those old 60s Rock Hudson Doris Day movies. I really love them, and I really wanted to try like writing one essentially, but making it contemporary, making it queer. You know, there are a lot of historical genres, and this is something that I think your book touches on that people have been left out of because our stories, while they existed back then, weren't allowed to be told in any way. And so I wanted to sort of figure out what a contemporary queer version of a Doris Day Rock Hudson would be. And what I came up with was, instead of Battle of the Sexes, sort of like this battle of the gender presentations, and it would still have the, you know, I'm going to disguise myself as this sort of guy to win that kind of person. And once I had that in place, I realized it really needed to be at an exclusively queer space, so that we could have these conversations about butch and femme and passing. And I think that once that came into my head, I'd always sort of in the back of my head been like, maybe a summer camp book, because I did go to a summer camp, but I went to a conservative Jewish summer camp. It was where I actually experienced like the most overt homophobia growing up. And so part of me is like, this is like me reclaiming my summer camp experience. And those two things really got meshed together. But I actually wanted to ask you a really similar question, because there's so many wonderful things in your book. But the thing that I thought was sort of brilliant was these diaries that the girls find. Mm-hmm. And the way that you explore a history that, and we're getting into spoiler territory a little, but you explore a history that at first they don't even realize is a Black history. And I really wanted to know what made you want to write about sort of the history of passing and tell it from this contemporary point of view.
So I don't know why I've always just been really fascinated with the concept of a Black person passing for white, which, you know, I know still happens today. But I think back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, which is the time that I wrote about, I think a lot of times it was for survival. So I kind of wanted to juxtapose that against like this girl who's growing up as the only Black person in her town that's very white and feeling really alone and like no one understands her, against like this woman who's like, okay, I'm actually going to leave my Black community in the South in the 50s and 60s, which, while not safe, was like at least her own community of her own people, and she could pass for white. And so she attempted to try it in California, completely away from her family. And I just thought it would be interesting to see like those different ways of being an outsider. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like, well, one of them, it seems, sort of brought it on herself. But again, it's like, do you stay where you're being, you know, disenfranchised and abused and humiliated, or do you try to start another life where you think people might treat you better, but if your secret is found out, like, you know, what happens then? So I really wanted to portray that, and then also give the girls a look back into Black history, because they're 12, and at that age, you know, going into 7th grade, I remember like I didn't know very much about Black history. Like my parents did a great job, and they did, you know, the best they could in the 80s and 90s to try to teach me stuff, but there just wasn't that much out there. And, you know, I grew up in Southwest Missouri in the Ozarks. So that was a very white area. My town was like 3% Black when I was growing up. Oh, wow. And yeah, it's not much better now. It's a little better. They held like a protest for Black Lives Matter. My mom was like, oh my God, they're protesting on the main street. I was like, that's never happened before. So things are getting a little better. But it's still a very white town. And, you know, my teachers didn't do a good job of teaching Black history. The textbooks they used were not adequate. No one really did much beyond that. So it was like 2 pages of, you know, Black history, which was like, there were people who were enslaved, and then they were freed, and then they fought for civil rights, and everything's perfect. You know, that's how it was presented back then. Mm-hmm. And I really think that does a disservice to not only Black kids who don't get to learn history in a proper way without having to go learn it themselves, but it does a disservice to non-Black kids, because then they believe that that's not history they need to know. And in fact, there's a lot of history that they need to know about people who aren't like them. So I just wanted to sort of weave some of that in and make it interesting. And I didn't plan to write a mystery, but I keep sort of writing accidental mysteries. So yeah.
I think it worked really well. And I really love the parallels. Like, to me, Laramie and in the diaries, I can't remember the woman she works for, the nice woman who seems very but that sort of overlap, they really seem to resonate to me, and I just thought it was so cleverly done the way you wove that history in. But to what you were saying, I think that there are some commonalities there, just because, I mean, I grew up in New York City, one of the gayest cities in the world. But as a teenager, you know, when I was growing up, it wasn't like everyone was out. I had a couple gay friends. Mm-hmm. And certainly in terms of history, I mean, the thing about being a queer kid born to straight parents, as many of us are, is that we're immediately part of a culture that our parents aren't part of. We immediately have a history that our parents don't have. And it's not a history that was taught in, you know, my extremely liberal high school in New York City. You know, we got Stonewall, Oscar Wilde, and that's about it. So I think anytime we get to explore these stories and these histories and like give them to people our age, it's so important. And I thought you did it with such a wonderful hand, because again, of that resonance with the modern day. Like, it wasn't just, here's history. Like, you know, it didn't come across as a sort of like, it could have been different for you, or like, it felt like this is still something that happens today. And I guess I wanted to ask you how you did the research for that, and like what you were like, did you go in sort of knowing that you wanted a specific plot that mirrored the contemporary plot, or did you make up the history first, or is it not made up at all? And then, as a sort of a side question, as a bonus question, is there anything you found out that you didn't get to use that was like really fun?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I don't outline, which is, I know, I don't know.
We're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, dangerous. I'm living on the edge over here. But I don't outline, which generally makes my drafting life and my revising life, my entire writing career, pretty hard. But I don't know, that's worked out so far. So we'll see how it keeps going. So I kind of just write my way into the plot. And at first I thought this was going to be like letters that Constance, the woman from the journals, is writing back home that they found. But then I sort of wanted it to be just more focused on her and like her interior thoughts and like what she was going through. So yeah, I don't know. Like a lot of the history I knew myself. Just I do. Besides writing, I'm a copy editor, and I ended up copy editing like quite a few nonfiction books for kids. Actually, I copy edited one called I think it's called What Was Stonewall. So some of the history that you wrote into your book, I was like, oh yeah, I learned that like from copy editing and fact checking that book. So, you know, some of the stuff I already knew, of course, like Emmett Till and, you know, the Montgomery bus boycott. But I was able to dig deeper on some of the stuff like the bus boycott for sure and just look into that. And a lot of, I don't know, like my parents grew up in Arkansas. They were born in the 50s. So right in the middle of Jim Crow. And they don't talk a lot about it. And so they don't say things like, you know, we had to walk 2 miles, you know, to school and snowdrifts and all that stuff. Like they don't ever say that stuff, but I find like the little snippets they give me, I'll be like, wait, what was that? What did you just say? You know? So sometimes they'll just say things that will spark like an idea for me to kind of research and dig deeper into. But a lot of it has just been from like my own reading and finding things that I'm interested in, or maybe stories that I don't find are told as much. I wouldn't say that this was something that I ever planned to put in there, but one thing I really wanted to, I wish that I could have put in, was about Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a Black woman who fought for voting rights in Mississippi. And there just wasn't like a good way to get her story in there, but I'm like constantly talking about Fannie Lou Hamer and wish that everyone would talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. So that's like probably one person that I would have liked.
Your next book.
Listen, I'm trying to find a way to write something about her on her. So there's also an incredible picture book about her that's out. But same with you, because even a couple, like I said, a couple of the things that I read in there, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that when I was fact checking that book for Stonewall. So like you mentioned having to sort of, you know, research and learn your own history because it's not being taught at school. And if your parents aren't in the LGBTQ community, then they maybe don't have that knowledge either. So what was your way in?
You know, I think a lot of it started with in college. And that was like very overviewy, like almost to the point that I feel like I didn't absorb very much, but I came away with a lot of books. And one of the things that somewhere along the line, I remembered and like became really fascinated with was like the first LGBT protest outside the White House, which was pre-Stonewall. Mm-hmm. And it was held by the Mattachine Society. And the Mattachine Society, I love with like this weird, like parental passion. They're just so cute. The Mattachine Society, their whole philosophy essentially was people will respect us if we blend in. And we'll get rights for us as long as we conform in every other way. And we show them that aside from our sexuality, we're just regular folks. And so they would have sip-ins occasionally, and they did these protests during which they wore full suits for the men and, skirts, dresses and skirts for the women, and sunglasses to hide their identities. Everything about that. I know, like, on some level, it's, like, super terrifying. But on another level, I think about that and I'm like, that's just the cutest thing. And what's really funny is history kind of backs me up there because no one covered it. One Black newspaper had a small article about it on the 3rd page. That was the only news coverage of the first queer protest outside the White House. And so, but like for them, it must have been the most exciting thing, daring thing in the world. So like, I think about them a lot in that protest. And I've tried to work it into other books in the past, but this one, it just made the most sense because so much of it is about like the conversation between passing, and conforming and being masculine and, being straight acting, versus being one of those gays where you're effeminate and you're violating patriarchal norms beyond your sexuality. And that is a conversation that has been going on in the queer community for decades, way before Stonewall. They used to literally, like, the story that I tell in the book is that at a meeting of the Daughters of Bilitis, which is the female version of the Mattachine Society, the sister society, they took a lesbian woman who wore jeans and leather jackets and had short hair, and essentially taught her how to walk in heels and wear dresses. And the first time she successfully walked in heels into the meeting, like, everyone applauded. It was considered such a success. And that whole concept, like, just imagining that is fascinating to me. Like, that is something that's been going on forever. And I feel like it's something queer kids need to know has been going on forever. This is something that we have been intercommunity sort of fighting and shaming each other about forever. And I really wanted to make sure that that was clear in the book. And then also let the kids talk about the conceptions of, like, what is it to be attracted to masked guys or not? What does that mean about you? And, like, what's the difference between something society has taught you to be versus something that you're not, or something that you are naturally. So, and I think that actually, I think that it links a lot to some of the stuff in your book too. And one of the other things that I thought you did so beautifully was the way that Laramie, the sort of, I don't want to say like former best friend, but the best friend who is becoming friends with the girl across the street, McKee, who is racist. Like, I mean, like, no, I'm not like saying she might not be racist. She's definitely racist, but yes, she's racist in ways sometimes very overt, but sometimes not at all overt, to the point where Laramie is like, that's not about race. And so I thought it was great that you get to finally have your two Black characters have these conversations about that sort of microaggressive behavior. And it's like it's her first time being able to actually talk to a peer about that. And I guess I want to know, I mean, I don't want you to necessarily talk about your own upbringing unless you're comfortable with it, but I want to know what sort of inspired that focus on that particular type of racism, because obviously racism comes in a broad spectrum.
Yeah, it's a big grab bag thing. Yeah, no, I definitely, we'll talk about how I grew up, because that's the inspiration for the book, really. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the only Black girl in my town, but again, it was a very white town. And, in high school, I want to say there were like 5 Black kids in my in my class. And, 2 of the guys, I think, actually identified as biracial, but they presented as Black. So everyone considered them Black. But yeah, and we were all friends, but, we didn't really talk about it that much. And it's really interesting. So one of the guys, he ended up coming out after high school, and he's very happily married to a wonderful man, and they have this beautiful family with these 3 children. And so I met up with him a couple of years ago when he was out here in LA, and we were talking, and I was kind of asking him, like, what was your experience with racism in high school? Like, I know we were both there at the same time, but like, how did you experience? And he was like, well, I dealt with it too, but he's like, I was more kind of like, he was raised mostly by his mom, who is white. And then he's like, I was mostly dealing with like being in the closet and, not wanting anyone to find out. So I thought that was really interesting, how you have to like, your intersectionality, like you have to like compartmentalize all these different things and figure out like, which one do I want to focus on now? But yeah, it was definitely not like a diverse place to grow up, and not inclusive at all. I mean, I had friends who, of course, would be like, well, you're just like I said in the book at one point, she's like, I don't think of you as my Black friend. You're just Brandy. Because it was like, the 80s and 90s, which was very like, we're colorblind. We don't see anything. And it's like, no, that's not the way to deal with it. You should see my color. And it doesn't have to be the topic of conversation all the time, but you should see it. But yeah, I would get a lot of the little things that are in the book, just people saying things that could be interpreted a certain way. And you can't prove that it was racist or that they meant anything by it, but quite often they did, and quite often it was. And even if their intention wasn't to be overtly racist, it still was, So I wanted to put that on the page because I personally didn't really make, I have come from a huge family. My parents, I said, are from Arkansas. They were farm kids. My mom has 12 siblings. My dad has 9. So I have 60 first cousins. And yeah, I know it's wild. So I had, family, but they were far away. And then I had we went to a Black church every Sunday. So that was at least outside of my family, I did get to see Black people every week. But there weren't a lot of people kids my age there. So I didn't really feel like I really met, other Black folks that kind of knew what it was like to grow up like me until my 20s, and then started kind of having those conversations of is this isn't okay, right? These things people say or do, and just having that validation of oh my God, I've been thinking my entire life that I was just making too big a deal of it, or if I said something and someone's we didn't mean it that way, just feeling like I had to kind of take all of that on myself. So I really wanted to write a book where I could, I never want to be too didactic, but I wanted to just put on the page what that feels like and what it feels like to finally have someone your age who's not your parents, who are just kind of we're older, we deal with other things, just get over it. To have this person who's no, this is not okay. I see what you're seeing. It's real and it's not cool. And you deal with a lot of that in your book too. And I loved those conversations that you were mentioning, all the different conversations about being queer and being a part of the community, because, as someone who's not, that's not something I'm really privy to hearing people who are part of the community talk about it. So I don't know. I'm just curious about sort of how you came to put those things in the novel and yeah, kind of your basis. Again, I don't want to dig too deep into your history if you want to, but
no, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that too. I think we're being very polite.
Open book. I know.
Yeah, no, I mean, so when I was growing up, like I said, there were a few other out kids at my high school. I was not friendly with either of the men that were out. They were different years than me, but I was friendly with a couple women. And actually even stereotyping a certain amount of be like this. And I remember one of the things that happened to me when I came out, I was out freshman year, but I wasn't a sociable young man. I had some friends, but it wasn't until I was president of the Gay Straight Alliance and I had to get up on an assembly stage and be come to the Gay Straight Alliance, that all of a sudden all these straight girls would come up to me and be we should go shoe shopping. And there was this sort of feeling that I had, this idea, I suddenly went from, Lev to gay Lev. Fun story, there were actually 3 Levs in my high school.
What? That's
yeah,
so
I don't even know. And to distinguish us, we were all given nicknames, and mine in fact was Evil Queer Lev. The evil, I don't know where they got that from, but
no idea.
Yeah, none whatsoever. But I remember feeling I'd gone from a person to a flat sign, and I remember people would be you're this gay character on television, original Fab Five. I'm dating myself there, but and which one they picked out. That's the one you are, because you were only allowed to be one of these 5 people, which was an upgrade from Will and Grace when we got 2.
I was gonna say Jack. Yeah.
You're Jack or you're Will, and Will is the correct one to be. I remember that distinctly. So I remember that my reaction to this, instead of being a sort of all these people are terrible. I mean, there were a little bit of that, but I also felt one of the things I needed to do was not be a stereotype at all. And I needed to make sure that my personality was sort of formed around not being the gay man that everyone expected me to be. And because of that, I sort of ended up like really repulsed by gay men who I did feel were stereotypes. And because of that, I didn't get to really embrace the queer community until much later in life than I should have. And that to me is a loss, like a real loss of my upbringing. And I really wish, when I was writing this book, I thought a lot about that and how, like, you know, teen Lev today feeling put in a box, feeling like the only thing that they're allowed to be is the queer kid. I wanted to make sure that they get to see that in fact there are as many queer kids as possible. Like, there are all these different ways to be queer, and that it's really about the outside world. But in Hudson, and this is getting into spoiler territory for me now too, but Hudson, his whole persona, it turns out, is sort of built around the idea that he can't be a stereotype because his parents essentially have told him that although they're fine with gay marriage, they love gay people, they're very happy he's not one of those gays. And, you know, when you come out, and this is supposed to be to well-meaning liberal people who love gay marriage, the idea that they will immediately tell you this is the correct way to be queer. And then when you violate that, when you fall into this stereotypical place, all of a sudden you're not as worthy of love. And if that's coming from loved ones, that can really mess with your sort of chance to define yourself as a teenager and try on different personalities. And that's why it was important for me too that Randy, the theater kid, get to try being Randy the jock for a while and find that he sort of enjoys it for a bit. But yeah, so that was very important to me as well. And I was thinking also about, you said it before, and now I'm just sort of switching the topics, but I don't have a good segue for this one.
It's okay.
You were talking before about your friend who you grew up with and being queer, and it reminded me of the structure of the family in this book, because she's got two dads, and she has a surrogate who comes to visit, and I loved and was really intrigued by that relationship with the surrogate, who oh wait, it's Denise, right?
Yeah, gosh, you're good at names.
And so I love that Denise obviously isn't her mother and is not a mother figure in her life, but is still someone who is important to her. And I guess I was curious about how you wrote that relationship.
Yeah, thank you. Like, no one, I mean, you know, a couple of people have mentioned it, but no one really mentions that part. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any experience with that. I've never been a surrogate. I am obviously not a gay dad. So I don't have experience with it, but I knew I really wanted, again, to sort of portray this, like, I guess, non-traditional family, because that was not something that I saw growing up at all. You know, we just, as far as my town was concerned, gay people didn't exist, which obviously was not true. But I didn't meet like my first openly gay friend until it was a coworker until I was 18, which is just like blows my mind because this was the 90s. I mean, I knew there was a whole gay community out there, but you know, it probably just wasn't safe in my town. So yeah, I wanted to sort of explore that relationship, and then thought, well, you know, if like her dads grew up with her surrogate mom on this hippie artist commune in Ojai, California, I know it's like my dream. And so I wanted to like explore that kind of thing where it's like she's very happy with her fathers, and has a very full life with them, and they're wonderful parents, but also like she's kind of got this like woman who's like her mom but not her mom, because I know there are a lot of those relationships out there that just kind of don't really get put into books, and they have a really like sweet relationship. But I also kind of wanted her to be dealing with this, like, okay, she's an only child, and you know, she's like the apple of her father's eyes, but then like her surrogate mom is having her own baby now, and I just felt like that would bring up like probably some conflicting feelings, you know, even if you're like, well, she's my mom, but like, you know, she didn't raise me necessarily, she's been in her life, and so I just kind of wanted to like explore that and just show this other side of how like family, I think I do this in like most of my books, how it's just like family doesn't always look like how you think it should or could. And, you know, especially for the Black community, I think that you don't see things like that as often, even though those families very much exist in the Black community too. So I'm hopeful that like some kids can see themselves in the book and also that like, you know, other kids are like, oh, okay, cool. I'm reading about this. This is new, but you know, didn't really know this existed. So
yeah, no, that's great. And it sort of relates to what I was saying. There's no one way to be Black either.
Yeah, no, there's not. I know. And I felt like when you were talking earlier, that felt a little like respectability politics. Would you call it that also? Where it's just like, yeah. So if there's a lot of overlap in marginalized communities. But yeah, I definitely felt sort of that growing up too, where it was like, I mean, I've just always talked like this. Even growing up in Missouri, I sounded like I lived on the beach in California. But I don't know, but it was like, you know, definitely speak a certain way and dress a certain way and make sure you're articulate and do all this stuff. And a lot of that, you know, I straightened my hair for many years when I was a kid because it was just like the way that my parents knew how to like survive in the very, very racist town. Like my parents got to Springfield, Missouri they transferred for my dad's job in, I want to say like 1971, 1972. And like no one would rent an apartment for them. And my father, a grown man with a good job, had to like have his boss co-sign on an apartment for them in early 1970s. I feel like people just think all of these things were so long ago. And it's like, you know, no, Stonewall was just what, 1969? Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's just like, no, this isn't that long ago.
Yeah, no, these are a lot of the, like, I mean, everything, the integration of schools, Stonewall, all this stuff is like in at least my parents' lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, unless you have anything else, it looks like we have a couple questions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest as well. Oh, the first one's for you, so I will read it. Brandy, you have written such a range of books for young readers now. I'm wondering how you see this particular book in light of the others, how it fits, if it's a kind of departure, and or if you feel that any of the experiences you've had writing your other books prepared you or empowered you to write this one.
That is from my wonderful friend, Donna Freitas, also an amazing author. I believe she has an adult book. She has a wide range of books for young readers. And I think her first adult book is out very soon. I don't want to speak to that, but look for that. Anyway.
I wanted to ask this too, actually, is like, why middle grade?
Yeah.
Like, what's that about?
Well, thank you for the question, Donna. Yeah. I don't know, like middle grade books were, yeah, and it's kind of weird, I think, because my YA is sort of like, I always call it like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like, you know, I don't really hold back like your book, love.
I don't know what you're about.
Right, right, yeah. I just want to like show what was an authentic high school experience for me and my friends, definitely when I'm writing my YA. But middle grade books are like the books that I just fell in love with growing up. You know, my mom recently sent like a bunch of old pictures that she had, which was just like amazing because you just remember back then it's like you just took a bunch of pictures and got them developed like at some point. So there's just like a bunch of like throwaway photos, but also like some cool ones. And there's so many of me just with just like a book in front of my face, just reading all the time. There was one Christmas I asked for literally nothing but books. That was one of the best like days of my life. But yeah, so middle grade books were just like my life back then. And I started writing as a kid. So I loved them so much. And they're the books that still mean a lot to me. Like when I think about like, you know, Beverly Cleary's books, Judy Blume's books, those are the ones that really, really stick with me more than any. There was young adult for sure when I was growing up, but it was like, I was mostly reading books from like, that were published in like the 70s, you know, reading them in the 90s, because it wasn't like the robust like world of YA that we have today. But yeah, those books were really special to me. And so I just thought, and I started reading more modern YA or modern middle grade, which is like amazing. Middle grade is, it's so great. I love it. It's so varied. And I just think you can find anything. And it's just like a sweet time in your life. Like they're definitely still going through things. Like the summer I was 12, I remember like getting in a huge like multi-person fight with like a bunch of my friends. And there was like all this like three-way calling and just like probably kids today don't know what three-way calling is, but anyway, just like so much drama, but it's also like kind of a sweet time in your life, like just before you hit like puberty and that like adulthood. And I don't know, I think there's something really special about that time and something like a little bit gentler about it. So yeah, it was a nice departure from my other books. And so I'm really happy to be able to write in both spaces now. The whole time I was really worried, like, is this even a middle grade book? But I guess it is, so.
Funny, I came from middle grade before YA.
Oh.
And that's the phone ringing that my husband will get in the
The
background.
landline, yeah.
I did middle grade first, and I had a lot of trouble sort of latching on to where the voice should be in terms of gentleness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm writing another middle grade now, or at least I'm trying to. But when I went into YA, it suddenly felt like I could just break free. So did it ever feel like you had to limit yourself when you started doing middle grade?
No, I think it was like kind of a nice break because there is so much like sex and drinking and like, discovery and like your young adulthood in my YA books that I was like, oh, this is nice. Like, she doesn't even really have a crush in this book. I was like, oh, I can just get away without like writing about romance or boys for once. So, which I could do in YA, but I think I enjoy writing about it more in YA. But it was just nice to like have this focus, like a really hard focus on friendships and family. And I think this is actually the first book that I really like explored race in such an overt way. And just, in each of my books, you'll see something related to race or racism. But I think this was the first one where I've had like a lot of really direct conversations, and it felt like appropriate for that age, especially since, like I said before, I really, at the time in the 1980s, growing up in Springfield, Missouri, the Ozarks did not have the language for that. So it just felt like really natural to write about that kind of stuff for that age group. Yeah. And then we had a question for both of us, right?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. Do you want to read it or should I?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Okay, okay. Can you both talk about the role that reading played when you were the ages of your readers now? What did you, cool. We kind of touched a little bit on this, but we can get deeper. What did you read and what do you wish you could have read? What stories were missing for you? Great question.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying before, for me, like I definitely wrote this for Teen Lev in that I would hope he would pick it up and sort of learn to embrace the queer community a little sooner and learn to sort of deal with his own sort of feelings of needing to blend in. But I think Teen Lev, I'm trying to remember. Teen Lev, I remember Middle School Lev a lot. Middle School Lev was reading adult fantasy. With some like graphic sex scenes. Mom, I know you're watching. I don't know why you let me do that, but thank you. But I think high school, I got really, really, really into Victorian literature.
Ooh.
I know. I became obsessed with Wilkie Collins, who like is sort of the proto detective novel, Woman in White. Like I loved that book passionately. I still do. And I became really obsessed with like Victorian epistolary novels. When I was a camp counselor, I used to like give out copies of Jane Eyre to any of the kids who I saw reading.
Yes.
That was like, so I don't know if a Teen Lev actually would have picked up this book. And I think part of it is partially, remember I was talking before about how like queer history to me was like Stonewall and Oscar Wilde. Well, I was really into Oscar Wilde, and I think, my first book is even based on Oscar Wilde. But I think for me, it was a sort of like Victorianism was a doorway to queerness because, of the dandy, because of these archetypes, and because of this idea of these people in history who we knew were queer, and the way that they sort of were obvious about it, like even if they weren't. And I was really intrigued by Wilde, and that sort of led me into this very romantic Victorian place for a while. So I don't know if Teen Lev actually would have picked up a contemporary YA, but it's nice to think he would have. How about you? What were you reading as a middle schooler?
Well, I just also wanted to say, like, I think Teen Love would have been friends with Edie in my book because she's like
Oh
the
yeah,
Victorian goth, so she's like all
yeah.
about.
Teen Lab was goth too. No getting around it.
That's amazing. I feel like there's a part of me that wanted to be goth, so I had to write one. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned like, I mean, this was when I was a little bit younger, but like Beverly Cleary, like the Ramona books, and just any of her books really I would read. And then Judy Blume. I was reading her more in like elementary, middle school. One author I loved that I talk about her all the time, but I feel like no one does, is an author named Barth DeClements. And she wrote, like, people know her titles usually, like Nothing's Fair in Fifth Grade, Sixth Grade Can Really Kill You. So she followed like this group of kids from like elementary school through high school. And then like in high school, it's just one girl that she follows. And she just like really talked about like the real stuff. Like there was one character who was a fat character, and her mom just treated her horribly because of her weight. And it just got really real. And I remember thinking, wow, like there are really horrible parents out there. And just knowing that, like, even though I hadn't experienced anything like that or didn't know anyone who had talked about their experience with something like that, that she was writing about something that was real. And she just really pulled no punches. And it felt like she really respected her kid readers to be able to handle this stuff. I guess you could call them issue books. I mean, I call my books issue books that aren't issue books, because they're talking about all the big things, but not preaching at you. And I felt like that's where she was coming from. And I just felt really respected by her as a kid and teen reader. I read so much Danielle Steele. I would just come back from the library. It was just like these stacks of these huge Danielle Steele books. And again, I'm like, I don't think my mom's watching. Mom, if you are, thank you for just letting me read whatever I wanted to read. Just got right in there with like the romance. Yeah, I would read just about anything. I really am now, when people say, who are you writing for? I am writing for young me, because I read like literally anything I could get my hands on. And there were all these like series in the 90s. I would love to go back and see if they were like, packaged or like how they were actually like written. Because there were just so many series, like Sleepover. There was like a Sleepover series, like a Pen Pal series. Like there was like a camp counselor series, all the stuff. I read everything, just like wanting so badly for there to be a Black character to show up. And if there ever was, like, it was very like not fleshed out, and just like, just for like diversity's sake, having like a Black character in there. So I'm definitely writing for me as a kid. And I mean, one of the things that I really loved, just the other day, I saw like this Twitter message from a reader that was just like, thank you so much for writing like a Black surfer girl who's, she's an adult woman, but she was like, for writing a Black surfer girl who was like me, I would have loved to have had your books when I was a kid. And that just like, that one gets me when people say that, because, I'm writing for myself, but obviously there's so many people who didn't see themselves in books when they were growing up. So it feels like a win when we can write them for people who feel like they didn't see themselves.
Yeah, I think we are lucky that we get to do that too. Like obviously there were, I mean, if I had to look at Oscar Wilde, there were not many queer representations in YA when I was growing up. And like, it's great to be able to put them into the world. It's really lucky. And, I think we need to make sure there are more of them somehow. But we still have one more question. Yes. Oh, this is a perfect one to end on as well. What advice would you want to give to young people who want to be writers?
Are you going to make me go first?
No. Unless you want me to go. But I read it, so you have to answer it.
Fine. Yeah. Oh gosh. I would just say, I don't like advice, first of all, so don't listen to me. But no, I would say, to read as much as you possibly can. Read the things that you love. Read things that are going to be a surprise to you. Like, I pretty much only read realistic contemporary fiction and historical, I guess. Just mostly realistic fiction, I would say. But it's always good to pick up like a fantasy novel or a magic realism novel, even though those are not always as accessible for me. They're a little harder for me to get into. Like I find great ideas, new ways into a story, and just like I don't know, it just opens and expands your mind. And, just to keep going, like I was a child writer, I started writing when I was 7 years old, and I have like Rubbermaid totes full of just like spiral notebooks that I used to write in. Like I would get like spiral notebooks and pens for my birthdays because they were just like plowed through them. I know, I was such a books and notebooks.
I was the same way. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. You get it. But yeah, I would just say like read as much as you can and just keep writing. Even if you think it's bad, it might be bad, but it's going to get better. And sometimes, honestly, it's like not even as bad as you thought. I still have that thing where I'm like typing now. I'm like, this is horrible. And then I go back and reread it a couple days later and I'm like, it's actually not that bad. So
yeah, no, you got to let it sit, marinate.
Yes. What about you? What's your advice?
I think what I would tell young writers is that, this is a career, this is a difficult career, as has been especially illuminated the past few days. This is a difficult career. And, when you are writing, the most important thing to do is that first draft, you got to write that for you. And I think there are a lot of voices that'll be telling you, no, I'm writing for these people. I'm writing for a market. I'm writing for this. But when you are writing, keep all those voices out of your head. And then after you have that first draft, learn to sort of love critique, learn to love hearing other people's opinions. And this one sounds crazy, but like, I think I have in many ways learned how to love critique, just because if people really want to help you make a book better, and not all of them do, that is part of the job of figuring out who's out there to help you, then I think you can only learn from it, and you learn from your writing, and you learn from the way people react to it. And so that to me is a process that I think you can't embrace too early.
That's great advice. I'm still trying to I could still use a reminder on that sometimes. So yeah, but no, it's true. Yeah, like notes are good. It means someone took the time to try to make your work better. Like as a copy editor, it's, different editing, but I know you've been copy edited several times. And like, yeah, like even I have to get copy edited. I find myself getting extremely defensive, but it's just like, no, like when I'm digging in, asking those like really nitty gritty, like annoying questions, it's because I just want to make the book as good as it can be. So,
yeah. And I think that note, we're out of time. Yeah.
Well, if we're not, I wanted to see if I can ask you quickly about your book is going to be a movie on HBO Max.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Camp purchased for HBO Max. Produced by Dan Jinks, who produced Milk and American Beauty and Down with Love, which is like the postmodern version of those 60s things.
Totally.
I absolutely love and really inspired the book, so it felt very... And it's written by... scripts written by Kit Williamson, who created and starred in Eastsiders, which is a great TV series on Netflix right now. And I think they're going to do really amazing things with it. And I'm really excited. So stay tuned. And thank you for asking.
I'm excited.